inquiry is being held virtually using Microsoft Teams. I would like to take this opportunity to welcome everyone to today's session. I'm Councillor Peter LeBroy, Chairman of this inquiry process. I'm joined by fellow councillors. I believe Lee Frost has given his apologies for this meeting, but on the panel today are Jim McKenna, Mike McLenning, Jane Pascoe and myself. We are supported today by David Rodder, who's our Economic Growth Manager, our Technical Officer, and Lynn Davey, our Democratic and Governance Officer, who has oversight of the process. The session is not being held in public, but a recording will be made available on the Council's website for viewing by the public. The objectives from the inquiry terms of reference are as follows. Number one, to review the current state of the economy in rural and coastal areas in Cornwall and consider future economic forecasts if current trends continue, for example, sector mix, economic performance, employment, salary levels, population levels, and so on. And to consider the necessary and desirable interactions between the rural economy and local towns in Cornwall. Number two, to consider what support is already available and planned for rural and coastal areas in Cornwall, and to investigate alternative methods of stimulating the economy of rural and coastal areas, for example, by taking evidence from other parts of the UK and Europe. And number three, to consider the potential impact of different intervention strategies and to make recommendations on how the Council can contribute and support the development of the economy in rural and coastal areas in Cornwall. The process consists of a number of recorded evidence gathering sessions, supported by organisational sessions and initial briefing information. This is our first recorded evidence gathering session where we are taking evidence from witnesses who have particular experience and knowledge to help us. We value the input of all witnesses who give up their valuable time to take part in our process and thank them for their input. With regard to the questioning of our witnesses, the process for each will be the same. Each witness will be asked to briefly introduce themselves, allow approximately 10 to 15 minutes for the expert witness to present their views and position on rural and coastal vitality in Cornwall, and to outline 3 or 4 recommendations that they feel would help stimulate rural and coastal areas. Only inquiry panel members may ask the witnesses questions. Other members are very welcome to attend and observe the proceedings, and I will give them the opportunity to comment at the end of each witness session. Although if time becomes limited, this may need to be at the end of the evidence gathering session as a whole. Due to limited time, I will try to ensure that questions and answers are kept as succinct as possible, particularly as there could be supplementary questions based on responses to questions. Further written clarification may be sought if necessary. All questions and responses are to come through me as the chairman via an X in the chat box as your indication as a desire to speak, please. Once witnesses have finished giving evidence, they're more than welcome to stay for the remainder of the meeting as a witness, an observer, sorry. The evidence from the sessions will be used to support the findings and recommendations of the panel, which will eventually come before full council. So that was a lengthy preamble. Here we are in our first session of this particular inquiry, which is very interesting to me because I think it could bring forward some very, very interesting information and some very, very good opportunities to help Cornwall to grow. So without further ado, Katie Good has agreed to come and speak to us. Thank you very much, Katie. I'm very grateful to you.
That's cool. Cool.
And the floor is yours.
Cool. So yeah, I'm Katie, creative director of Triangle Pixels. We're a VR game studio based in Bude. We've got a few awards under our belt, including BAFTA nominations and stuff like that. So pretty cool. And nobody really knows that we're here. So I'm also part of advisory board member of the BGI, the British Games Institute. Rather like the BFI you might have heard of, and also I help now lead Cornish Games. So as I come here and share my screen with you guys. So quickly a bit about games development in Cornwall. So there's plenty of us, plenty of studios that are starting, up and coming, or already very established. Other freelance developers, service and tools industry, as well as quite a few places that are doing like games education. And just for like the scale of where like my industry is and where I'm part of it, yeah, we contribute well more than fishing or film or TV to the UK GBA. Video games do a substantial amount for GBA to the UK. And also on top of that, we're all about exporting Cornish culture as well. So for myself, we've produced a PlayStation VR game, the first game to be completely playable in Cornish. And then for developers outside, there's actually a developer that has made a game about his life growing up in Cornwall that's doing incredibly well as well. So some of the pros that we found from working within Cornwall, especially like rural Cornwall, that's the thing, is obviously that you have got quality of life and space. For us, it was like reasonably priced. I know there's obviously like St Ives and stuff that's way too pricey for us, but for Bude, it's that sort of balance, which is really good for us. But also, I think something that people don't necessarily like relate to is actually like there is this big artistic community, and that mixture of artists around you in that network with everyone sort of feeding off each other really does help to inspire you. For example, even just walking down the street when they put in like pictures on the street floor to say the one-way street for COVID stuff, like having that actually like painted up by a local artist was really inspiring. It was like, that's really awesome. Hey, wouldn't that actually be quite a nice little game? It just all feeds off to each other. The biggest cons that we have is obviously it's very hard to travel into Cornwall. So we've literally had investor come over from the States who was really interested in us. He got to London and then he was like, I can't get to you. That's it. I just can't get to you guys. Sorry. And so he didn't come over. And so that relationship sort of dropped out and stuff. So it really has a dramatic effect. And it's obviously very hard to get around around inside Cornwall as well. So just time consuming to get to events and things like that. We're also often very much outside the areas of influence. So we are trying to, in Cornish Games, make our own area of influence where we are supporting each other as a community, even though we're on the far reaches. It does mean that obviously, you know, not being in that London scene, that Manchester scene, Guildford scene or whatever for games does have an effect. So we need to try and get people over here a little bit more from those places. And it's very hard to find opportunities and just generally know who's around and things like that. So in terms of like the trifecta, as it were, of different areas that we really need to improve on, one is basically communication. So people talking with each other, knowing who's around, having opportunities to network and meet new people. That goes down to connectivity. So that's both connectivity in terms of humans, connectivity in terms of the internet, and connectivity in terms of public transport too. And then those also going up then to opportunity. So looking at showcasing events and like how we can support culture, things like that. So the three key areas that I really feel like will massively improve us is, the first is the fact there's just no, like it shouldn't take over 4 hours to get down to Falmouth University, which are a good partner for us. We had a worker who was down at Falmouth. He was a graduate. He was starting our first job with us. He didn't have a car. He literally couldn't come to the office. Like the one time he came to the office, he had to come around and stay around our house. That's unacceptable. For us to get out of Cornwall, it's even worse. Like I was not expecting when I moved here the fact that it was going to take over 2 hours if you catch the bus just at the right time to get down to Exeter. That is ridiculous. To get down to the train station, the main line, like it's just not, it's not scalable. And it means that people can't come here. And even worse is from the airport. Like that's basically if I need to get to London and back again in the day, which does happen, or an investor needs to come here, I'm like, go to Newquay Airport. It's obviously going to be your fastest route. And then when they get there, they can't get to back. They can't get up to us. It's over, you know, there and back. It's ridiculous. So it makes it just basically impossible for young people. You know, we're talking about looking at the Kickstart scheme now and using that Kickstart scheme to get employees. But how are those Kickstart scheme people going to be able to come to us and literally live in Bude? It's not going to work. As I say, we've already had investors and press literally decline to come and see us, which has directly affected our bottom line. It's hard for us to get out to events in Cornwall. We can't, we have to drive. When I got pregnant, it was impossible for me to go to events like when I got heavily pregnant. And then on top of that, obviously, further down south we go, you need to get a B&B, and you end up having very low attendance generally at events in Bude or the far reaches or down in Penzance. So in terms of like big changes, obviously, the dream goal would be to have some sort of actual North Rail connection. I know that's completely nigh on impossible, but that would really dramatically help. The buses need to be a service, not just for a profit thing. So therefore, we can't just have one bus every 3 hours on a Sunday. That needs to be a regular thing, because I don't use them because they're not regular and I don't know when I'm going to get one back. So therefore, they don't put as many on. It's a big vicious circle. Someone needs to come in and break that chain. And then the other thing as well, which I don't think anyone's really aware of, is the fact that there's this new on-demand bus services and car share, where you can basically like order a bus like you do like an Uber, and use those style of apps. And those are designed for low traffic areas, and are being trialled around the outside of London, but they are incredibly good. The next area is showcasing. So basically there's this idea of the fact that nobody around us really knows that we're here. We actually had the local museum got a VR experience made by the university, and they didn't know that it had a VR developer in town that could work with local students to make a actual VR app made by local people. They had no idea, so that was just such a missed opportunity. Local businesses obviously are missing out on knowing the technology that's around, on interesting collaborations, and obviously young people tend to move away because they don't know what is in the town to be able who to work for and things like that. And of course, visitors only really know the beach and food. So we need to start thinking of events, of websites, of social media campaigns, and basically like getting everyone in the area to know who's in the area. It could lead to potentially new business to business like deals for us, which would be awesome. Interesting collaborations as well. It will help local students actually stay in the area and can see it's like, oh yeah, there's these people that actually do this sort of work here. I don't have to move away. And visitors as well, like they could actually see it as an actual place to potentially work or for jobs, that they can see that there's something other than the tourist industry here. And it also means as well that when we bring people in, they can see the fact that like all these press and investors are coming in like for all year round commerce and not just for the summer where the heat's hot. And for us as well, it helped export that Cornish culture, which is what we want to do as well. And the next big one out of my massive list of would be nice ifs would be proper fibre to the premises. So the fact that the broadband speed here is literally a fifth of that of the average speed in Romania. We can put it into perspective now how far behind we've fallen. Like you go, like I know that's super fast. It was meant to bring everyone up, but it brought everyone up 5-6 years ago to that standard and has just stopped. That's it. Like we should be getting at least the top open reach speeds, which is 1000 megabit per second. And we've got something like, the adaptive thing is that all the internet cables come into our coast. Like they all go to GCHQ Bude round the corner. That's where they go to first. So why is our internet so slow here? That doesn't make any sort of sense. So for fibre to the premises, obviously now that obviously a lot more people working from home and learning from home, it'll be instantly beneficial for them to have like clear calls that aren't dropping out, being able to have like international meetings and interviews and things like that. Obviously you guys are all connecting now so having a decent internet so we can hear you clearly and not all crinkly and stuff would be useful. Having time-sensitive uploads and downloads, that's what we've got. So it can lead to greater productivity, obviously not having to wait around and things. We'd be able to actually start offering our own sort of servers as well. So rather than get like Amazon servers or whatever for anything, we can have our own servers local in our area, which will help reduce down costs massively. We keep control of our own data, which is good for information protection, data protection. And it could also potentially offer new sorts of business services. Like you can imagine someone offering like a new voice-to-voice thing, for example. Websites are generally getting bigger and businesses are all about big data now. So every single day we're doing about 50 gigs of uploading, downloading. It's a ridiculous amount of data. And to be stuck on a 30 megabyte connection, it's not scalable. And it's only going to get worse as our projects get bigger. And as I say, super fast needs to be a continuous project. It's basically technology doesn't stay still. So that's like my 3 key areas. And obviously there's like a lot more different areas I feel like we could potentially like work on. But I feel like they're the ones that give you the best long-term bang for buck, rather than necessarily just grants or investments and things like that. So I guess I'll just pass you back now. If you've got any questions or anything.
Katie, thank you very much. That's actually an amazing presentation. Has given us much more than I'd hoped for, to be honest. So it's you've come up with some really good ideas and solutions there. Apart from myself, there are 3 panel members, and I want to go to each of them individually to have a chat with you. There are 2 questions which we also want answering as well. So maybe what I'll do is if I go to the 3 individual councillors, but before I do that, I'll ask you the questions that we also want, and you can think about the answer. The first question is, how important is your local town to the business that you provide? And the second question is it's the other way around. How important is your business to the town that you consider you serve or serves you? Okay, so with that, and I'm going to go in what I believe to be alphabetical order, based on first names. Jane Pascoe, would you like to have a chat with Katie and just explore any of those issues that she was talking about?
Yes, hello Katie. So that was a really interesting presentation actually, and gave me quite an insight into what you do and what difficulties you experience. And it seemed to me that your problems are travel, definitely connectivity with your broadband connections. I know the feeling on that one. So really honestly, it's not actually where you're located physically. For example, it wouldn't matter if you were in Bude or Penzance or I'm in South East Cornwall, to actually where you are for you to conduct your work and progress. So what I'm trying to ask is, in relationships to that important question that Councillor LeBoy has asked, it wouldn't matter what town you were in, but do you find that you are imbued because it's important to you, it has value to you, or you have value to Bude, as opposed to being somewhere where there is better connectivity on a main line, for example, Bodmin, Liscard, etc. Is that what's important to you, or do you prefer to be out on that limb? And I'm sorry, Councillor LeBroy, I know you don't like being thought of as a limb, but you are, and it's probably the worst place in Cornwall for connectivity. So that's what I really want to get my head around, if that's possible.
Okay, so part of the reason why we moved here was because fundamentally there was a cost. Like, you know, going down to round about Falmouth and things like that, the prices there were incredibly big. We could have literally moved anywhere in the country, like there was nothing really stopping us from doing that, but we were aware of the fact that there is a growing games industry here, and being at that forefront rather than being like the small little person in Manchester or something would be potentially much better for our company. But also then as well, even though we're a technology company, we're very much artists. Like, I think people don't really appreciate the fact that programmer can be incredibly artistic, and we need somewhere like Bude where we do have a touch more breathing room. It's not necessarily the lack of connectivity, like, trust me, I really want connectivity, but we do need that breathing room and that little bit of space, and also that artistic drive and that close connectivity with, like, within our environment to produce interesting creative works. Like, for example, like our previous game, like, had there were so many towns that were actually in our local area within the game that suddenly now go international. Like, everyone suddenly knows what Widmouth is and things, like, just things like that. So there are creative reasons why we are imbued. I'm also, since I've moved here, I've realised that there is a much closer community here, and having, like, for our own mental health, having friends and neighbours who aren't necessarily in our industry, obviously, that are nice people and we can work with and we can make that difference in that town is so much nicer, like, than, I mean, I have lived everywhere. Like, throughout my career, I've had to, like, I grew up in Birmingham, I've moved to Cambridge, Nottingham, lived in Guildford, Hazelmere, London. I've been everywhere, and I've come to realise that for my day-to-day being, I do need that little bit of space and having that closeness. But that shouldn't mean I shouldn't be able to get up to somewhere. Like, we are in the UK. This is a small island, fundamentally. There is a train station really like an hour's drive away. There used to be a train station here, like that. So therefore, we should still have that connectivity. And ultimately, we are in the UK, we should have decent internet connection. As I say, all the cables come through Bude, so why the hell is the internet connection so bad here? Like, yeah, I was not expecting Bude to, well, anywhere in the UK to be this disconnected, basically. So, you know, I think that's a fair, reasonable reason why I'm here.
Yeah, that is very helpful. I mean, what it tells me is that as we all know, living here in Cornwall, the quality of life is so much better here. But we do suffer with connectivity problems. But on balance, even though most of your work is done online, it is very important for your work to have that connectivity. So yeah. Thank you. That clarifies that. Thank you.
I mean, yeah, that's the thing. Day to day, obviously, this is fine. But it's those key times when an investor needs to come here, or we need to go out to an expo, or even if I need to get to hospital, like that, things like that, that's when it falls down.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Jane. You described Bude as being out on a limb.
Yeah, sorry.
No, that's fine. So when we actually did have a railway station here, which was taken away during the beaching cuts in the late 60s, the network that served Bude was known colloquially as the withered arm. So you weren't far off. OK, so Jim, alphabetically, you're next, and then I'll come to you, Mike.
Pete, thank you. I answer to James in future if it gets me an advance on the questioning, just in case might have been asked. But Katie, thank you. That was really, really good, actually. That was an eye-opener for me, and I live in Penzance, which is, for different reasons, I guess, a fairly sort of a bit of an outpost. So I got a couple of questions. One is, you mentioned Falmouth University and the potential employee who wasn't able to sort of get from A to B. What, if any, sort of support have you had from the university as a business of this type? Because when they set up, they were giving guarantees about being the University for Cornwall. They were supposed to be getting out rather than seeing everybody come to them. So, simple question, have you had any support? Or have you requested any support, or have you had any from them?
It's quite mixed. So, first of all, when they set up, because I'm talking about the Games Academy here, yeah. So I knew them before they set up. My partner at the time actually helped set them up as well. And he actually was responsible for Launchpad as well, starting up. Mm-hmm. So there are multiple things. So we very much help each other. Like, we come in, we're often doing lectures for them now with them. to making sure that they're updated on latest trends, latest technology, latest software and stuff. They obviously pay for our time for those lectures. They've given us, so the Self-Respirating Technology Network, which is a connection of all the universities, they helped fund us for a year to research accessibility in VR. And obviously, like, you know, their students coming out, that's an accessible workforce for us, potentially. I know that quite a few go to antimatter games. And then, but at the same time, they did do that thing with a local museum where they didn't tell us that was happening, because they had this mantra of like, we need to start making stuff ourselves, and then in which case they were literally treading on our heels and potentially a threat actually to our business, like really anti-competitive. But they said they're not going to do that going forward, and that actually going forward they're setting up a VR lab, and that will help bring in local non-VR businesses and show the benefits of VR that it could do for like architecture and stuff like that. And then in which case then they'll show off those possibilities and then give that work to local other businesses in the area to actually make that work for those people. So it's like an evolving relationship. And I would say they do a pretty good job, but they're a bit of a giant and sort of stomp over a little bit, basically, if they're not too careful. And you know, we do actually have, because I am good friends, they do actually, like, have members of staff come up and visit us and things. So
okay,
they do try.
Okay, so thank you. And secondly, what's the size and scale of your business at the moment? Sort of how many are there of you? And if it's not commercially confidential, what's the sort of ballpark turnover?
Okay, so our ballpark turnover is about 50k at the moment, I believe. There's 2 of us full time, but that's on purpose. We refuse to take any equity, and we are all about hiring freelancers. Okay. So we've gone up to like 8 or 12 before now, and it's the way that a lot of the games industry is moving forward. It's very much like film, where you don't need a film crew for the entirety of making a film. So that's why we tend to take on freelancers. So we'll have like a writer near the beginning of the project or something, and then we'll switch to having an artist or something, and
brilliant.
Things like that.
And my final question, briefly, Pete, if I may, is around, we're interviewing the Kim Conchie, who runs the Chamber of Commerce in Cornwall. Now, I get that that's mainly for towns, which is one of the reasons we're trying to have this inquiry. If we were to persuade him to do more for rural areas, as in look at sort of emerging businesses, successful businesses, those sorts of things, would that be something you would be amenable to if they were to make the effort to come to you rather than vice versa?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Pete.
Thanks, Jim. I think it's about creating those networking opportunities and the communication elements of your you called it a try something. I can't remember what it was.
A really trifactor. No, I could have told it a triforce, but no, we didn't get a joke.
Okay, right. So Mike McLenning next, please, if you'd like to come forward.
Katie, good afternoon to you. My name is Councillor Mike McLenning. I'm from St Stephen and Brannell division, which is the Clay countries. You know the area? I don't know if you know the area, but
nope.
we're the rural area. I've got a few questions. When you meant you wanted space, what do you mean by that, please?
So actual physical floor area really needed, and that was for all the VR headsets you see around. Basically, the VR headset we started with needed 4 meters by 3 meters empty area, which is now filled with playpen, but empty area. So obviously, like, a lot of houses don't really have that. So we've ended up getting a converted barn. So obviously in London, floor space is expensive and a premium. So it's something that we couldn't have done in many cities.
Right, I understand that. Yeah, I just thought you meant the space of Cornwall. And I want to lead on to that. The quality of life. We've got our son living down here now. He's also working as a consultant in London, but does it from here. And he's also produces a Push chocolate, which is a vegan chocolate. Now, his quality of life, he says is down compared to being back in London.
Mhm.
That's where his friends are. So what do you actually mean by quality of life for you down here?
So I used to work on Oxford Street, so very, very central London.
Yeah.
My lungs were awful. My husband's lungs, when he used to just cough up black all the time. So there's the health, there's the mental health, the travelling, the stress of having to commute. I had to commute for like an hour and a half, 2 hours sometimes. Sometimes if the train's cancelled, I'm stuck in London, that's it. There's the actual light coming in. You do not appreciate how low all the buildings are here, or the fields being open. It means that you actually get vitamin D, and the fact that we can just walk out at lunchtime and go for a surf.
Right. Let me just stop, because I probably haven't got much time. Conversely, though, you mentioned that it's difficult to get around in Cornwall, but it's easy to jump on the tube at Oxford Circus and go to Baker Street, for argument's sake. So that would be a plus, wouldn't it? You're also saying it's down here, it is more difficult to get around with transport. But I'll leave that thought in your mind. How many people do you actually employ at the moment?
So yeah, at the moment we're just 2 full-time, and we've got one freelancer at the moment, but we are just going into a publishing deal now, hopefully, which means that we'll have a budget of about 400,000 to be spending on staff over the next couple of years. Right.
Okay, I'm not your target market. My son would be, but so what the games that you produce, are you selling them to?
They're international.
You sell them direct online then?
Some of them are actually, you can go into a game shop and physically purchase a disc still. But yeah, most of them are online, so anybody can buy them. The other arm of our business is that we do consultancy and development services. So actually, the Serena Centre that opened up in Cornwall, the NHS Cornwall Partnership Trust actually funded us to make a VR experience to help with young people and children's mental health, to help bring them down from anxiety attacks and things like that. So it's not just the commercial fun games. But
where do your games fit into the marketplace? Are they in the top 20, 100, or?
I wish they were in the top 20, because it's not Fortnite. It's not going to be, especially in the VR industry, we're not going to see Fortnite numbers, because not everybody has a VR kit, but it's certainly enough to maintain us and for us to do well within. So we're very happy with where we're at.
Okay. Last question. What is it you don't like about being down here? Or is it all plus?
I mean, it's amazing and I wouldn't change it, but I want to change. I feel like we can make changes that will help improve things. So it is basically all comes down to connectivity. So that's connectivity between people, connectivity to the internet, and connectivity in terms of transport. And just building, there's no reason. I've met so many awesome people here, but I know there's more.
But you're not missing meetings, are you? Because they're going to be online anyway, aren't they? I mean, my son used to see buyers all over the place, but I said, don't bother, just arrange a virtual.
So when it comes to expos, so I have done quite a few virtual expos recently. I went to one in the States in VR and things. It's not the same. And that's because you don't meet people spontaneously. You have to basically choose who you're meeting, which means you're meeting existing contacts more often than not, or you're meeting basically cold callers. Yeah. So you don't get that.
Yeah. And some of these buyers charge for a meeting, don't they, as well? So, okay, you've answered my questions. Thanks very much then, Katie. Thank you.
Cool.
Thanks, Mike. Katie, it might interest you to know that one of our guests, Bert Biscoe, is the previous portfolio holder for transport. So I'm waiting to see an X in the box from Bert, because I'm sure that he might want to say something about this stuff.
Sorry.
I'm interested in the principles of, I sort of got it in my mind as described as non-linear public transport. That is not a bus that goes from A to B, but something that does something else. And you described it as on demand. I think it's effectively the same thing.
There's a video by Jeff Marshall, actually, that does a very good description of how it works around in London. So yeah, YouTube Jeff Marshall and on-demand service.
Okay, that's an interesting name. I'm just going to write that down. I guess that you would be supportive of that principle, and also one of the odd things that faces our own community, and this is obviously is different from a lot of the rest of Cornwall, but a lot of the border divisions, and we're a border division here in Bude, we access our services quite often outside of the county of Cornwall. For instance, if you want to go to hospital, the chances are you'll go to Barnstaple or possibly Derriford. It's very unlikely that you'd end up in Trelisk.
Yes, I mean, I ended up down in Exeter for when I was pregnant, which also means that when it comes to the travel app that's being developed, I've had to give plenty of feedback of the fact of, yeah, we do need to get down to key places just outside the border, basically.
So I think it's very important, and I'm hoping that you will say this back to us so we can take this as part of your evidence, that the links that are created for public transport are not only for Cornwall, they're also actually examining the cross-border issues that the border communities face.
It's critical that we have those cross-border links. As I say, it's critical to get down to the mainline train station, Exeter, critical for hospital, and critical for Newquay Airport to get out as well.
Yeah. I was astonished when I saw your map of how you would access Newquay Airport by public transport from Bude. Absolutely crazy. I thought there's a bus going there, but never mind. Katie, have you heard of Cornwall's Creative Manifesto?
I have. And I have given some feedback with Screen Cornwall about it.
Right, okay, perfect. Right, now I'm very glad that Bert Biscoe has put an X in the box, but I'm also aware, Katie, that we haven't come back to you to answer the initial questions that I asked to begin with. But let's go to Bert and have a chat with him. So Bert, if you'd like to come forward.
I put my X in the box at your request, so just so we know who's responsible. Speaking as the person who developed the one public transport system, which is the integration of bus and rail with a shuttle running between Penzance and Plymouth on the main line, I feel that that's but the first part of a much bigger development process, and I very much support what Katie's saying about the North Cornwall line. As you know, Chairman, I believe that all the parish councils along the North Cornwall line and all the way on up to Oakhampton should be ganging up on the highways, on the Transport Authority in Cornwall, and saying you must be pushing for this. If we push, we get. Cornwall has got the best reputation of any local authority area in the UK for its relationship with the rail industry and its development of rail. And there's no doubt that rail provides, in environmental terms and efficiency terms, just purely by the fact that it's timetabled, it provides the best option for land-based transport, strategic transport links and domestic links. So I would also support the reconnection of Foy to Lostwithiel, the reconnection of Weybridge and possibly Padstow with Bodmin Parkway, as well as community services running on that line, and the reconnection of Helston. And wherever you look, you have got communities like the one that Katie is exemplifying, creative communities building up in those places, in those areas, who would really, really benefit from that connectivity. But the other point I would make is that where I think one public transport didn't do very well, or indeed I would use the word failed, is that they didn't fulfill their commitment to develop the relation, to develop community transport, both as a responsive on-call service and as a service-based thing for connecting remoter communities to the transport networks. There's a huge amount of work to continue to do, but it will only happen if the political pressure that I was able to exert when I was there is sustained and comes in louder voices from the community. So I'm sorry, it's not a question, Chairman. It's a. Can
I add to it a little bit? Parkways are amazing, and even though it's a bit further away, sometimes we do actually use whatever the one is down the M4-ish. I don't know what it's called. Chiverton Parkway. Like, so if Oakhampton basically had a parkway, that would make it so much easier because that halves the bus route at least.
Yeah. Sorry, I would have thought your mainline station actually was Bodmin Parkway, but.
Don't know. But it's Exeter. Google says Exeter is the closest, and that's it. So
yeah, the people from Bude accessing railway services go to Exeter. They only use Bodmin if they've fallen asleep and missed Exeter on the way home, which has happened in our family. I won't say who. Thanks for that, Bert. I'm really interested in exploring this non-linear public transport or on demand, however way you want to couch it, because I think there's quite a lot of science that could come forward to help us create a really interesting system. And I'm trying to get a little community car club going for Bude, which is just a half a toenail in the water, if that makes any sense. So Katie, can I come back to you and ask you about your relationship to your local town and how important you are to it and how important it is to you?
So, I mean, as I say, to us, it's really been like stone block that we sort of rely on in terms of like our mental health, physical health, emotional well-being, and our creativity as well. We know we won't be where, in fact, we don't even know if we would have been a business if it hadn't been for moving here and moving to Bude. I just don't think we'd be where we are now. We wouldn't have the awards, the accolades, the players, the games that we've got, because we just wouldn't have had that creative drive. I felt like literally a stuck canary joking to death in a tiny one-bedroom flat in London. So to have all that now has been incredible. And it's rewarded us with plenty of surprises, like there is some really great grants and networks that we've got here. We wouldn't have been able to get those otherwise, even though we do miss out on the national ones all the time. And for us as well, like obviously the people that I met here have been exceptional, and to be able to have this sort of relationship with you guys as well, like this would not have happened in London, for example. So being listened to. As for us on the locals as well, like obviously we've done business stuff with people like Treadwind Design. We've helped them introduce them to VR, and actually they were leading the way in VR. First architectural firm to have VR, because they had headsets before they even came out because of us. We've helped obviously the local like mental health hospital, children's mental health hospital that's opened up, just in terms of stuff that we've created. We take on work experience students from the secondary school, from colleges, and now with Real Ideas Organisation, those who actually have come out of education at some point in their lives, are still young and haven't gotten jobs. So really keen on basically like helping all variety of young people, and introduce I mean obviously it's an easy win for some ways because they're obviously into games, and so to show them careers in games like writing, programming, art, even just organising and data and finances, like it covers so many. So giving them that inspiration that they can go and do that, and mentoring them on that journey, I feel like it's been really cool. And I think also locally, just chipping away at little ideas that I have. Ultimately, my job is experience design. My job is designing for people's like everyday life and how to better their lives and improve themselves and things like that. And so I just enjoy using those sort of skills in every area, as you can probably see today. So that's why I guess there's another thing I could do for the local community, really. Okay,
so Katie, I'm extremely grateful to you. The presentation that you made on screen, would that be okay to share with us? Because there's some information in there, and I think the little visual thing that you drew was very, very interesting to help us understand how your particular industry does view the three key things. And obviously you had your recommendations encapsulated within that. So could you email it to one of us? Is that possible? Or?
Yeah, I'll just share it now. That's fine. There you go. All done.
Yeah. Perfect. Are there any of the officer panel that would like to join in and pick up anything we might have missed, or anything that might come forward from that, please? David, I'm thinking.
Hi, Katie. David Rodder, Economic Growth Manager at Cornwall Council. No, that was, I've got nothing to add. That was really, really, really good. I think you're able to pull out some of the key issues facing you as a rural business in Cornwall, and some really clear recommendations for what would make your life better. I suppose the only question around connectivity, and you mentioned about fibre to the premises. So the question would be fibre to the premises or 5G, or doesn't it matter as long as it's connected?
So being very technical, I know the limitations of 5G, which they don't normally put in the marketing material. So for example, when it rains, the internet connectivity can drop. basically it doesn't really go through walls very well, so normal brick walls, whereas we've got fat Cornish walls. So in terms of 5G connectivity, that's great for on the go and really awesome for low latency, but fundamentally you will have connection drops and there will be like brownouts and dark areas. So for reliability, fibre to the premises would be the strongest. I also know that 6G is very much on the horizon as well. Like, again, something I don't know so market and talk it about, which will have even worse because having done physics and also understand how the wavelengths work and how frequency works and things like that, basically, again, it will have those limitations. It might even be stopped by glass. So for 5G to really work, that would be like lots of different stations, potentially 6G even more so. The other type that you haven't actually necessarily mentioned that might be quite interesting is mesh networks, which are normally used by very rural areas. So you will have like one central point which is connected to like fibre somewhere, and then like everybody is almost like connected to each other via a networked interweb, which is basically how the internet originally formed. And that is of a potential, but for us, like we need that. It's not, we're not too fussed about the latency. We're more interested in solid connectivity at a fast rate. And really, you're still going to be cables. I mean, give it 20 years, you might see the Tesla's, what's it called, Skynet, whatever it's called, the one that's going over the using satellites, and everyone would be able to connect to that. But again, you put a roof over your head, you might not be able to get connected to it. So, yeah. There's lots of options. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, David. So, Katie, I think with that we'll say thank you very much indeed. You're very welcome to stay and listen on, but I think for the time being we've squeezed as much as we can out of you. So I'm, as I said before, I'm very grateful.
It's cool. I listen.
That's great.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So to the rest of the panel, we're due to move on to 2:32, Councillor Biscoe. Do we want a 10-minute comfort break, or shall we crack on early and have a longer comfort break after we finish with Bert?
Keep going, please.
Keep going. Good idea.
Keep going. Right. Okay. So if Bert, if you're happy to come on 12 minutes ahead of schedule, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you very much for the opportunity to do this. I've written a paper which I will send to you, and I'm just going to read you the first paragraph of it because that'll tell you why I'm here. So I was brought up in the farming and quarrying village of Stithians, and I attended school in Truro. After a period of peripatetic musical and poetic practice, or being on the road with rock and roll bands, I settled in Truro. And I've been a member of Truro City Council since 1987 and served on Carrick District Council for about 15 years. I was a dual member of District and County Council for some time before the advent of the unitary in 2010. And during that time, I've served on cabinets, chaired Cornwall Development Company, then known as Cornwall Enterprise, and have been the chairman of Cornwall Rural Development Programme, which was just over 15 years, during which time millions of pounds of public funding was channeled into the rural economy. I have served on the government's Rural Service Network and was a member of the UK delegation to the Council of Europe's Council of Regional and Local Government. I'm a long-term campaigner, and transform the planning system so that Cornwall, in partnership with the Isles of Scilly, can manage and determine how it is shaped and developed. In the 1980s, with my colleague Mrs. Carlyon, I ran an organisation called Cornish Alternatives to the Structure Plan, which campaigned to strengthen the then structure plan and subsequently local plans. I was chairman of the Cornish Constitutional Convention, which campaigned in the 2000s for a Cornish Assembly and was critically influential in securing the current governance settlement for Cornwall, which is an interim step between internally conflictual two-tier local government and the establishment of a Cornwall and Isles of Scilly Regional Assembly with devolved powers and functions to enable Cornwall to reach its highest potential and to be a vibrant region within a reformed British Union. And that's all I just wanted to say as far as who I am is concerned, because I remember I didn't give you a biography as politely requested by Lynn. So I want to come at this from two different points of view, which amount to the same thing. The first one is to start at the beginning and say which came first, towns or country. And of course, the truth is country. It was here before the people. And it has different characteristics in different places, which are dictated by geology. And part of geology is, where is the water? And where are the hilly bits and where are the flat bits? These are important things in terms of determining where towns go. And I think that if you look at the history of towns, most of our towns, our market towns, were established in the 12th and 13th centuries by charter, and they were mostly planted, as they say, or they used to say in those times. I would like to think that what caused the towns to be there was the fact that they provided services and a marketplace for the rural economy, which had grown out of the hunter-gatherer economy, and as a result of the transformation to an agrarian society. So towns are very much part of that evolution, and that the relationship between towns and country is actually not the one that we normally assume. The town is not the driver, it is the service provider to the rural economy. And that is the perspective that I think it's important to adopt in looking at the question which this panel was set up to address. So I would then like to say that I think it's really important that we recognise that the services that are provided to the rural economy by towns require that the towns are actually themselves fostered by larger and more centralised institutions. So one of the key things for me is, where do we put the professional resources that the public sector has the ability to deploy, so that we support the intellectual and professional infrastructure of towns in order to be able to provide adequate services to country. Now, I realise that we live in a time when things are very tight on resource and so on, and the temptation is to centralise and transform, and we're about to enter into another period of that with Cornwall Council. But in terms of how we actually create a quality of life for people, how we create the well-balanced interactions between different forces in our society, I think that we need to be investing our energy into market towns on the basis that the market towns are there in order to provide services to the rural economy. Now, I think if you look at the rural economy in a slightly different way and ask yourself what happens in it and as a result of it, no matter what anybody says, the basic foundation of the modern Cornish economy is the combination of tourism and farming. The triumvirate of tourism, farming and food processing. And those three things all rely on each other to exist, and they all basically rely on rural life to provide the resources that keep them there, and they also shape the rural resource, which is the foundation of our tourism industry. So if you look at the analysis that was carried out by the University of Exeter Department of Geography in its annual tourism survey since the year dot, you will see that almost invariably it is the environment and the landscape which attracts numbers of tourists in the proportion of about 90 to 95% annually. And I think it's really important to bear that in mind. So the farmers tend to be the managers of the landscapes which attract the tourists, and they're also the producers of the food, which increasingly, because we've been very smart through the period since the late 90s in marketing Cornwall as a centre for excellent food, and we've done a lot of branding around that and a lot of skills development around that, the combination of the two generates a huge amount of wealth. Much of that wealth, Chairman, this is a key point for me, much of that wealth that is generated in the rural economy is actually managed, to some extent stored, and certainly advised upon and invested through towns. And I feel that one of the sectors that we ignore at our peril is the sector of wealth management, which in market towns in particular is much more present than actually we think. But they just live upstairs behind relatively tiny brass plates, but they do service a very, very significant chunk of the economy. One of the people I would suggest that it might be useful to think about talking to in that regard is Tom French, who's been in that business all his life and understands it extremely well, I think. who I'm sure will be delighted to be asked a question or two about what he does for a living. So that's that side of things. I think the other point I would make is that in looking at the interactions between the rural and the urban sort of scapes of Cornwall, I think it's important to try and understand that we have at least three different sorts of town. We've got the market towns, which, as I say, were established in the sort of the early medieval period by charter. You've got the coastal towns, which were established mainly as the result of the railway and the hotel industry in the 19th century, and mainly at the instigation of the former mayor of Truro, Sylvanus Travail, who built all the big hotels that attracted all the trains that started it all off. Not that I'm claiming it for Truro. And then you've got your industrial towns, and in your industrial towns, I would look at places like Camborne and Hale, for instance, or indeed Falmouth, which is both an industrial town and a coastal resort. And I think if we understand things in those terms, clearly the needs of coastal towns are different to the needs of market towns. And similarly, the industrial centres, I think, are in a period of radical transformation, and I think that's shown by some of the socio-economic profiles that you see in those towns, which are very, very difficult for us in terms of management. So moving on, I think that it's really important to look at this issue about the interaction between the two by inverting the normal way of looking at it and asking ourselves, what do we need to do in towns and country in order to make sure that the interaction and the relationship between them is productive, balanced, and sustainable? Well, certainly what Katie was saying about transport is clearly one of them. And I think that, the thing for me is that I would look at it in terms of transactions. Most people move from A to B in order to conduct a transaction of some sort. And I think that is equally the case these days on the internet, that the internet is essentially a transactional highway, if you like, no matter how big or small those transactions turn out to be. And in those terms, I would put those together into a single policy area rather than have them as two separate things. And I would have them talking to each other and complementing each other and integrating with each other. I think that would be good. So if you're going to take your asymmetrical public transport on demand system for rural areas, then it's going to be the internet that provides you with the means to make that work efficiently and effectively. I think that's just one example. I feel that the other thing about towns is that everybody and I'd just like to focus, if I may, on market towns rather than look at the whole gamut, if you don't mind. So in terms of market towns, I think that it's really important to look at the sector in the economy of market towns, which lives upstairs and out the back, which is the professions and people in commerce and commercial services. And, a town really is as good as the number of solicitors, chartered surveyors, state agents and so on that they've got in them, and of other professions, partly because those professions all employ people who pour out of the offices at lunchtime, 12:30 to 2 o'clock, and shop and use all the services in the town. But most importantly, because they are the people who actually provide the services which support rural businesses. And they're able to support rural businesses through a catchment area, which is normally the catchment area of your market town. And it is really important to make sure that we are able to sustain those people in ways that enable them to do their business effectively. I don't think the town as such is going to lose its role as a focus for a hinterland. Although I do think that the current fad of home working and all the things that are being done to promote that, market it and facilitate it, I do think that they present a risk to the viability of towns, but they equally present a risk to the ability of rural businesses to be able to work collectively with those professions. If they're dotted about all over the place, it's very difficult to get your chartered surveyor to talk to your accountant if one of them is in St Blaise and the other one is in St Leven, and actually if you go to a town where you've got those people retained and you can bring them together and talk to each other. You can do it by internet, but that's not necessarily always the best way to do business, particularly personal and confidential business, I would suggest. So I think it's really important to recognise and support and promote the professions and commercial services. The second thing is that I absolutely agree about the accessibility, but I feel also that there are trends which are quite popular and being promoted by people like, I can't remember is that man's name now, the one who's going out on a lecture tour making a fortune because he can't find any other way to do it. Is he called Kinsey or something? And that is that the relationship between a town and its hinterland is really organic. It's really important. It's really flexible. It's asymmetrical, to use your term. But it relies absolutely on accessibility, and accessibility pretty much in both directions. And some of the things that we are doing, and I'm speaking now particularly about Truro, which is being treated as a guinea pig in terms of how we're going to manage town centres in the future, I suspect, in this regard, is that we have put a park and ride out on the edge. We've bumped up the medium and long stay parking charges in order to deter people and encourage them to use the park and ride. And we've instigated a huge range of things which are kind of deterrents to people who need to come from 5 miles away in and out to do a piece of work and go. We've made life quite difficult in terms of accessibility for them. And I think that we are not thinking about our interaction and our reliance on that hinterland, which you might determine by drawing a 10-mile radius or 15-mile radius around your town centre. And that to me is both to the detriment of those people and communities and businesses that are operating in the rural environment, as much as it is to the detriment of the town centre as an employment centre, a service centre, a cultural centre, and indeed a town. So I think that it's really important to look at the professions. I think that when you look at an industry like tourism, the role of the town is slightly different. In that it is a catalyst, it does draw people towards it, but it is actually part and parcel of the overall product. And actually, so for instance, the Truro Tourist Information Centre, it runs an accommodation register and a booking service, and it provides booking service for accommodation providers in a quite substantial radius. I think the furthest one away is about 26 miles in St Maur's. So it's important, and that interaction, interrelationship is really important. But it's got nothing to do with town and country. It's got to do with the fact that it's there, and it's there because it's a town. But actually, it's got a role in the rural economy to play, and the interaction is not one of a line between the two. And you live on that side, you live on that side, and we'll see how the pair meet. They're intertwined and meshed together. The internet is certainly really powerful, but it is no substitute for personal contact. You can't get your chiropodist to sort out your toes on the internet. You can make the booking, but you can't get them to do it. And actually, getting people into and out of town, particularly farmers who keep their toes in Wellington boots a lot, which is a really big issue in the rural economy. It's really important that people can get in and out, and that we maintain and sustain those networks of professions which actually make for a quality set of services in an efficient way to people who want to use them. So the challenge is, just to move on for slightly, certainly the transport issue is big, and I would suggest that the most important thing that Cornwall needs to do at this moment to sustain the whole economy, rural and urban, the whole thing in together, is that we need to campaign really strongly for Cornwall Council in the lead on the white charger, pointing its lance straight at the heart of the Department of Transport to get the signalling on the main line upgraded to digital, so that actually we can improve the capacity and make the thing work better for us. That's that's a primer, and I think it's really disappointing that the council has, for one reason or another, has taken its eye off that ball and its foot off that accelerator. I think that we have to understand the relationships between farming, tourism and food processing much better than we do at the moment. And I think we have to recognise, I note with great interest in a paper that Lynn sent out, which came from some inquiry, that actually when they talk about the economy, it was the I can't remember the title of it, when they talk about the economy, they don't even put farming in there. Well, farming is a key element of our economic life. You know, it may not employ very many people, but it generates huge amounts of value, and it shapes the landscapes that generate the revenue from tourists that we all enjoy. Key issues. People think that mining's over. I don't think mining's begun. I think that when resources planet-wide have run out to the extent that the Chinese are running them out, look what the Cornish are doing up in North Australia, blasting the place to bits. Mining to surface, they call it, when the whole landscape just implodes because they've exploded something very large underground, and they just go in with the grabs, put it on the boats and send it to China. They don't even get the chance to smelt it or even sort it. And I think that we've got the largest resources of tin and China clay in Europe. And those two minerals, those two commodities, represent the ability to connect two things to pass an electrical charge across them, and to insulate two things that you want to stop passing that charge across. And your telephone, your computer, your fridge, your up and over garage door that never works in your mother's house, all those things, I'm not a complaint chairman, all those things rely on the conduction and the insulation of an electrical charge. That's electronics. And we're sitting on those two commodities. They, whoever they are coming back to dig this stuff out. They're coming for lithium. They're coming for indium, which is a rare earth that they've discovered in South Crofty in significant quantities, without which we wouldn't have a flat screen to be admiring each other on this Zoom at this moment, and so on and so forth. So we're sitting on significant resources. Much of that exploitation will happen within the rural area, but much of the professional support and so on, which will support and facilitate that, will occur in the towns. And we need to make sure that we keep the wealth that it generates, the revenue that it generates, the profit that it generates, the investment that it generates. We need to make sure that we're on top of that in Cornwall. We can't have happen to Cornwall what happened to Scotland over the oil. I think it's really important that we ensure that in the planning system, which is just town loaded, you know, everybody's got to move to town because it's more sustainable to work, because everybody works in town. This is a kind of assumption of the planning system. And if you want to build a house in a rural area, well, man, you've got to jump through a million hoops and then get past building control, you know, and actually it's really, really very, very difficult. We've got to make sure there's accommodation for ordinary working people in our rural area. And the way to do that, in my view, is to attack the second home and to really, really get to the point where one way or another, we create an environment in which owning a second home is actually something that you do as the last resort to express your grandiose wealth or whatever it is they want to do with it. Just one last point. I do totally agree with Katie about the North Cornwall line. I talked about that. In terms of health, I think we need to stop centralizing that, and I have to say the NHS seems to be looking at this. We need to invest back into the cottage hospital. We need to look at Cornwall, as indeed the Victorians looked at it in the pre-oil era, when they were trying to provide comprehensive services to the whole community. The cottage hospitals matter. I would put super surgeries in them, because I think if you put the cottage hospitals and the super surgeries together, you create an attractive proposition for recruiting high-class GPs into our rural health service. And that's the way, in my view, that we should compete against all the pressures that we're under in terms of the health service. In schools, I would certainly reverse the trend of shutting village schools. I would go back in. And I think I'll just make one mention, and that's about the ferry, the Plymouth Roscoff ferry. That's an immediate issue. And I think that the whole of the Cornish economy, if that ferry link shuts, will be damaged beyond compare. The tourism industry, farming industry, rural life, urban life will all be affected by it. Cornwall has become reliant on it. And I think that we should be ganging up on the MPs to gang up on the Foreign Office, on the French government, and get them to actually put the necessary resource in there so that the chief executive of Brittany Ferries doesn't have to stand up and say, I've got enough to be going on with for a year. He should at least be able to say, I'm running a sustainable business. I realise that the services we provide are necessary and we'll keep it going no matter what. So the last point I would make, and I think this is really, really important, and that is and this is on Cornwall Council, the health service, the police, public providers, and that is that we should be making sure that we put professional resource back into our communities, big and small. So I see nothing wrong with village bobbies. I see nothing wrong with village doctors. I see nothing wrong with village school teachers. And those people, as well as doing their jobs, always bring a level of analysis and capacity to community life. And if Cornish communities are suffering from one real deficiency, it is that getting professional resource to help them support themselves in an increasingly competitive world has become far too random. And so therefore you've got communities that are up and communities that are down, depending on who happens to live there. Somebody might have the governor of the Bank of England living in their village, and somebody else might have nobody at all, you know, Bert Biscoe's daughter living in their village, whatever it is. And that disparity is really difficult, and the public sector can organise itself to actually address that serious deficiency. So I hope that's I've attempted to try and indicate that ultimately I don't think there is a difference between town and country. We're all in it together.
Thank you, Bert. I've got a whole page of sort of scrawled notes of things that I sort of some of them I think I do want to come back to you on. Very interesting to see how the officers are going to record what you've said, because there is so much content in the last 15 or 20 minutes or so. So for the panel members, I'm going to go in reverse order from which we did previously, and I'm going to start with Mike McLennan, please.
Bert, you know I've got absolute respect for you because you're a very knowledge person on Cornwall, and what I can't even get close to all your points. I tackle it differently because I don't come from the school of thought that we used to do it that way. I look at change and all the marketing courses I've been on in my career, and I feel that I live in a rural area. No one in my area can rely on transport. I'm trained to know that I need to get to meetings in my past life in 20 minutes, so I jumped in the car and drove there, and I couldn't afford to hang around waiting for a bus in Hewerswater or anywhere like that. Most of my time waiting for buses, waste of time transport. You've got to get on. I can do some more work in the meantime. That's why I work. I think the people in my area have got good access to what they need in the sense of shopping. I've heard some of this the recovery from Cornwall, and all your stuff in a way makes sense to me, but I don't fully understand how you can get it into place. We heard about there's going to be 13,000 redundancies in Cornwall, lost their jobs. They want to find more jobs. God knows where they're going to find them from. I don't know where that's going to happen. But I just think we've got into, from my background, I've got into a stage of quickness, easiness, and if I don't do any shopping, my wife does it, it's delivered, or she might go out shopping. And we've always done that for years now before we moved to Cornwall. So you get into how you've been used to working, and I don't think people down here give two hoots about what goes on in my division, goes on in Penzance or anywhere else. They're just interested in their own area and the base things that makes their life okay. Now, I understand we've got to look for change. Transport's not going to change. I can't see. I thought your theory was pretty interesting, but I can't see what's going to change because, you know, when I see buses at lunchtime going around St Stephen's and they're empty, it's not economically viable to even increase the bus services, and people have got to set off hours in advance. We've got a dentist appointment at 11 o'clock and wait for a bus back. Don't know how they're going to do that. I think from my short time, not compared to yours, but in Cornwall Council, about 3.5 years now, I think it's a draconian place. I think they should all be working more together. You probably can't see my picture. You said they should be working more together across the board. I don't mean like people like the officers here, but at the top end. It's all in little grooves, little ideas, little theories. Even when I explained, which the people wanted to know about the waste contract, It's not what I thought it was going to be, so I've got to go around and explain it differently. It seems to me that Cornwall is still years behind where I come from, and we're used to a different way of life, and I've had to adapt, and I think it is a nice life. I like a bit of slowness when you're not a councillor, but I think all your theory and ideas sounds wonderful, but I don't think the people that count understand it at all. And that's my concern, that you're an expert, you're a very intelligent man, not being patronising, but you've got to get that past other people. And I don't think there is such a dialogue of concern between the rural in my area and the places like St Austell or Truro. They go there if they want to do their shopping, but I don't think they think about it. I think they just live their lives, and that's how it is. That's me.
To which I would just respond by saying, I think that the reason why they put people like us where we are is in order to do that thinking.
We have to be listened to, though. But we have to be listened to.
Yeah. I think, Mike, it's quite an interesting points that you're making, and I think Bert has come up with a quite a wide range of things that could have positive actions come from them. But if these points that our witnesses make to us don't result in firm recommendations going back towards the council, it would be a disappointment. So I think, Mike, exactly as Bert said, the panel is here to listen to these points that are being made, and then to formulate a set of responses to those, which will go before the council early next year in the form of recommendations to take specific action. So it should be quite an interesting process to go through.
Just a quick response to that. The things that Bert said, because of his knowledge, it's nothing new for Bert. He's got experience about industry and what should happen and so on. So if he's saying this now, why haven't all the clever so-and-sos connected with Cornwall Council over the last so many years, 10 years, not highlighted all this, not come up with it themselves? It's taken for this committee and for Bert to come up with those progressive ideas that they should have known about these sort of things before. I mean, as I say, they're light years behind the rest of the country, yet sometimes they blame the rest of the country for being neglected, but they're not doing, they've been doing their own thing as well. I'll stop there.
Yeah, I don't think I'll attempt to answer you, Mike, but just take on board your point. Jim, your turn next.
Chair, thank you, Pete. Thank you. I just want to sort of ask Bert what I think is a fairly straightforward question. Bert, over the years, there have been some places which have had significant resource. They've had the benefits of significant investment. They have the infrastructure that a lot of the more peripheral places, and I don't include Penzance in this, more peripheral places such as Katie outlines in Bude haven't got. Our role as councillors, if we're not comfortable with something, if we think something needs realigning, is to make that point and ultimately to make decisions which actually make it happen. So I guess my question would be, and forgive me for appearing rude, because I know you're a passionate councillor for Truro, that do you accept that some places have had it relatively easy in comparison? And would you be comfortable, possibly in the next council after the elections in May, with attempting to redress some of that balance? So that, I mean, I'm not sort of speaking for Penzance here, we're doing okay, but it's taken a lot of years. But places like Bude, places like Liskeard, one or two other places as well, and also the non-towns, so the rural hinterlands, how would you actually redress some of that balance so that people can have some form of transport, they can have an acceptable level of superfast or the nearest we're going to get? How would you actually go about making that happen, were it within your gift? Imagine you are the new mayor of Cornwall. In fact, don't do that, because that'll start a separate conversation. But imagine you're the leader of Cornwall Council in June next year.
Yeah, so I think the most important thing is that we have to look at Cornwall as a whole. And I mean, I accept that there is a very strong perception that Truro somehow has benefited over the years from various waves of development. And so, I mean, you can go back into the splitting off of the diocese from Exeter in the 1860s, and ending up with the cathedral in the middle of it, and changing our name to a city and all that sort of stuff. You can go back to that, and you can follow through. You know, who made the decision to put County Hall in Truro, who made the decision to put Treliske in Truro, and so on. I mean, to me, as you know from my, well, maybe you don't, of my membership of the Health Scrutiny Committee, I have very strongly advocated that actually Treliske is the biggest weakness in the health service, because we do not have a health service in Cornwall. We have half a health service in Cornwall, because Treliske provides services to a catchment which runs from St Austell down to Penzance and the Isles of Scilly, but from St Austell on upwards, you have to go to Derriford. And in my view, we need to actually take control through, the ability to persuade government to give us a degree of devolved autonomy to be able to design a health service, for instance, which serves the whole of Cornwall. So I think we need 2 district general hospitals, one in the east, one in the west. I would put one in Hale and one in Bodmin, developing what we've already got. The network of super surgeries, I would hark back to that pre-oil era of the Victorians and say, let's use the cottage hospitals because it's an infrastructure which is there, and actually, if you look, is quite well spread around Cornwall. We've got a crisis in terms of getting GPs because we don't seem to be able to recruit them very well. I think if we change the nature of the job and create something distinctive in Cornwall, that would make it more attractive to very bright people. I think you can look at the same thing in terms of education. In other words, I think the Cornwall Council needs to reform the way that it's looking at Cornwall, get out of this thing of town and country, get out of this thing of network areas and all that, and look at Cornwall as a whole, and with the Isles of Scilly, actually, not that I'm advocating taking over the Isles of Scilly. I'm just saying we have a partnership. Not for 1 minute. Please, heaven forfend. Even though we've planted one of our own over there now. I think that we have to change our perspective, and also we have to change the nature of our relationship with central government. We are inclined in moments of less confidence to be very, very deferential to central government. And actually, when we do well is when we're advocating for ourselves to acquire the ability to exploit opportunity or to develop whatever. So for instance, Objective 1 was a really good example. I think that what Nigel and I did with the transport system at the time was another good example. If we know what we want and we're ambitious, you can go and persuade government, but you can't do that if you're feeling deferential about who the government is. And actually, we need to be a bit more stroppy, confident of ourselves, and a bit more stroppy about what it is that we want, how it is that we go and get it. And I feel that's a cultural thing. And I think that if we adopt those values and those approaches, and we look at the systems we need to have in place, and we look at the whole of Cornwall as an entity, then it seems to me that 1, you generate a much happier set of communities within it. 2, you create a community which is it. And thirdly, we've got the opportunity to use the successes and the critical mass that we've got in order to be able to make very strong arguments to government if we're confident about making those arguments. Now, I know that's much easier said than done, but confidence is everything. And I think that one of the things that gives this impression that some places are better off than others and so on and so forth is actually derives from a lack of confidence, generally speaking, in the whole of Cornwall. So I think we need to act in the whole of Cornwall, and I think that the inequities and imbalances will take care of themselves.
Okay, thank you. Just one final point, Pete. Please don't call on cottage hospitals birds.